Horror Convos, come on in, have a seat, stay a while, take a load off, vibe into the beat. We can just chill, have a drink, say what's on our mind. Never know what you're thinking, hey, it could be neat. Fear is everywhere, in your mind, on the street, in the earth, and the stars. Scary things you left for free. What you gotta say about it? Having fun, you and me. If you got nowhere to go, no place to be, just relax, have a chat, but don't think it's therapy. If you get too afraid, there's a door you can leave. Good night and be well. Maybe talk again, we'll see. Good night and be well. Maybe talk again, we'll see. You can night be well. Maybe talk again, we'll see.
Hello, my hemoglobin-challenged insomniacs. Welcome back to Horror Convos, a casual, relaxing, and occasionally funny podcast where we choose one horror topic per episode and discuss anything related to it that we want. Movies, TV, novels, comics, video games, radio dramas, personal experiences. Nothing is off limits here. My guests and I share our opinions and compare examples that portray the subject. New episodes release every other Wednesday. Horror Convos is available to listen to on Spreaker, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and come hang out at the Horror Convos Facebook page to share your thoughts and leave suggestions. If you want to listen to the podcast without commercials, you can go to patreon.com/horrorconvos. Tier 1 membership gets you full episodes ad-free as well as exclusive content like outtakes that didn't make it into the podcast. Tier 2 membership gets you access to vote on what we discuss in special event episodes. We appreciate everyone who donates to help our little podcast grow. That's patreon.com/horrorconvos. If you'd like to be a guest on the show and have a subject you're passionate about, you can send an email to keithhorrorconvos@yahoo.com. All one word, all lowercase. I can't realistically have everyone on, but will review every email I can. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, and bite right into the jugular of that notification bell so you never miss when our newest content is uploaded. I'm your host, Keith Harris, and we have such a whopper of a discussion this time that I ended up having to separate it into two parts. I'm just trying to break the habit of releasing these 2.5-hour long videos. Not everybody has time to enjoy those, and I want to be respectful of your time. Maybe occasionally for a special event episode that's acceptable, but typical podcasts, I'm going to start moving away from that. So today is going to be part 1 of our show's first conversation on vampires.
Blah, blah, blah.
I do not say blah, blah, blah.
I have been waiting for months, trying to find the right time and the right person to start talking about this. I have so many thoughts on just a wide list of vampire stories that I've seen, from movies to TV, games, and so on. This is a big one for me. Joining me today is my past guest, Melissa's husband. You've heard him mentioned in Whispers, Song, and Legend throughout a couple to a few episodes now. He's one of my closest friends and the most intelligent, educated man I've known to date. I've had some of the best conversations of my life with him and almost always learned something new from him. He also happens to be my barber. If you've seen the Barbershop movies, he blows Cedric the Entertainer out of the water in every way except for the hair. He's not as much into horror as Melissa and I are, but there are a couple monsters he's passionately knowledgeable about. This is one of them. Please welcome my next guest, Tony.
Spoiler alert.
So how did you get into vampires? Here's it, were you introduced to them through books, TV, film, or just a oral storytelling?
Oh, obviously it was, for me, it was a short story, actually. I don't remember the name of the title, but I remember what grade I was in. And it was a short story in a second grade primary book, second grade English book, literature book, whatever you want to call it, in school when I was over at Pearson's Corner. Have you ever heard the story of the old man and the 3 cocks crowing? Before the third cock's crow, it was anyway. It's like a folk tale about this old guy who a traveler comes upon, And this old man jumps up on his back, right? And he gets him by the throat because he can't cross running water. And you're kind of left not knowing what the guy is for a little while. But he says he has to get home before the third cocks crow. And obviously, the rooster's crowing 3 times. The third time will be the sun fully up. And so he's on this timer. And this old guy, this old decrepit man, has strength like you wouldn't believe. And is riding on this guy's back because he's got to cross these bridges. But he can't cross the bridges. So he's grabbed him by the throat, riding on this guy's back like, hurry, before the third cock crows. And the whole thing's actually a vampire's folklore about how they can't cross running water and the sun will destroy him. And he doesn't make it if you care. The guy doesn't get him back out of the sun before the sunlight fully rises.
Yeah, you remember the title of this story? I'm sure
I
I can look it
don't.
up
It's
later.
an old folk tale, though. It was used in a literal elementary school book. I say elementary school because when I was a kid, we didn't really have like primary, elementary, middle, and high. It was just elementary school, junior high, and high.
Huh.
So we went like kindergarten through 7th grade was the elementary school. 8th and 9th was junior high, and 10th through 12th was high school.
Yeah, my background was definitely different. I'm sure we probably read some vampire folklore in school just for educational purposes. Because, I mean, it's like Dracula in particular, at the very least, you could argue that even though he doesn't originate in American folklore, he has become a part of American folklore to the point that pretty much everybody and their grandmother who's familiar with vampires has at least heard of him. So I grew up being introduced to them mainly through TV and film. I don't think I ever read Bram Stoker's Dracula all the way through. I have read excerpts of it, but my grandmother was a huge fan of the 1992 film with Gary Oldman playing him. And I have to admit, even though that's not my favorite depiction of Dracula, but yeah, I will say that's the first one I remember. I don't. I mean, I do remember Bela Lugosi. I mean, I'm sure I saw bits of that on TV.
But you wouldn't have been like seeking out black and white film at the time. Although
it depends. I did watch a lot of old TV growing up, so it depends on the movie. But in terms of which vampire movie first really stuck with me, like I watched it from. I didn't watch 1992's Dracula from beginning to end the first time. I thought it was kind of boring for the most part. First one that really stuck with me was John Carpenter's Vampires, 1998, starring James Woods as Jack Crow and Thomas Ian Griffith, I believe, as Valak. And that movie it's basically a Western with vampires. And I loved the shit out of that movie as a kid. Like the first time I watched it, I think was at my grand's place. It's around the scene where Valak ambushes Jack's team at the Sun God Hotel, Motel, whatever it is after they destroy the nest that he was in charge of at the beginning of the movie. I love how this movie opens so much. Like it takes it without much dialogue. It does just a perfect job of setting up this universe where vampires exist in regular everyday life. It's not some gothic, dark fantasy universe that looks as if it's kind of removed from reality. It looks just like the plain old real world where vampires happen to exist. And you have James Woods leading this crew of vampire hunters, but they're not Van Helsing types. They're an organized, professional, almost like pseudo government agency, an unofficial one, and paramilitary that they're employed and funded by the Catholic Church. Jack was raised in the church after his dad was bitten by a vampire. It killed his mom, and he ended up having to kill him. So you right off the bat establish that these are professionals. They do this for a living. This is just another day at the office for them. And I love how the film shows the process of how they work. They don't just go in guns blazing. They're so methodical about everything, from setting up, getting their equipment ready, talking out their game plan like a football team, how they're going to break through the door, how they play the corners like, professionally trained SWAT police. And once they actually start fighting the vampires, which look awesome in this movie, I love the makeup style for them. It's simple a little bit, but it works. It's still very much based in the kind of traditional Western European depictions of them. There's a little bit of the romanticism factor with Valak. So he's sort of a Dracula archetype, but much more brutal and much simpler in terms of his folklore. But I could go on and on about that movie. It's just, I own it. I've watched it so many times. It's one of my favorite John Carpenter films.
Y'all work together?
That's right.
What you do?
We kill vampires.
No, really. What do you guys do?
I'm not kidding. We kill vampires. Hey, Catelyn, tell the lady what we do for a living.
Kill vampires. Hunt them down. Kick the shit out of them.
Dude, I love James Woods in this movie so much. Like, Jack Crow is my favorite role that he did. After, it'd be a close runner-up behind Hades in Disney's Hercules, which was also the role that introduced me to him. So yeah, fully admit probably some childhood, nostalgic bias there. But after Hades, Jack Crow, no question. And it's just, James Woods makes this movie. The writing, the dialogue, and his delivery, it's this perfect blend of badass and hilarious to where I can laugh my butt off at this movie at points without losing the ability to take him seriously.
Have you ever seen a vampire? No. Well, first of all, they're not romantic, all right? It's not like they're a bunch of fucking hopping around in rented formal wear and seducing everybody in sight with cheesy Eurotrash accents, all right? They don't turn into bats. Crosses don't work. They don't sleep in coffins lined in taffeta.
In my opinion, he's like the perfect archetype for a modern vampire hunter, at least for the 90s generation. Maybe not so much by today's standards. Some of the stuff he says you definitely couldn't get away with today. But I kind of like that about him, that, he gives so little of a shit about trying to be polite. He just stands on business. And he's out to get the job done. But he also comes across as someone that you could see yourself sitting down to have a beer with. There's kind of a playfulness to him where he's not just brooding and serious all the time. He definitely can be. When he goes into, badass action hero mode, then the switch flips and he's strictly, just doing what he's got to do. But other times, he's got a sense of humor to him that I think adds to what makes him endearing.
Let me just ask you one thing. After 600 years, how's that dick working? Pretty good?
For me, it's like, that was like my gateway, was that short story.
And you got Nosferatu as well. I saw bits and pieces of that on TV. The first time I saw that character in a way that stuck with me, though, was, you're probably going to laugh, SpongeBob SquarePants Season 2, Episode 36A, The Graveyard Shift, the hash-slinging slasher. I don't know if you remember this episode, but
the hash-slinging slasher. Surprisingly, I think I do know what you're talking about because of my child. You
would be amazed at how many kids were introduced to Nosferatu for that episode of SpongeBob. Like
Nosferatu.
It was so out of left field, but it works in such a way that it just ingrained that character in my memory. I have seen parts of the 1922 film. I haven't seen the whole thing. I did watch the 2020, the new version with Bill Skarsgård, sometime this past year, and I like that one. And it's definitely a very different take on the character. Count Orlok, I should say. I always forget. Like Nosferatu is the name of the story. Count Orlok is the character.
Yeah, I think it's a super classic film for a lot of reasons. Like Nosferatu is such a wonderful, like kind of, I don't know, it's artistic. And the makeup at that time. You look at what it inspired with, like that remake with who played Green Goblin.
Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, see, I got it.
He's playing the Van Helsing equivalent in that movie.
No, Willem Dafoe is like the Nosferatu in Shadow of the Bat, isn't he?
Shadow of the Bat. I'm sorry.
Which is based off of the Nosferatu movie.
I'm sorry.
The whole point of that movie is it's what really happened while they're filming.
No, I got you. Yeah, he plays in the new Bill Skarsgård Nosferatu as well, but in that one he's playing like the professor vampire expert archetype. He's not a vampire hunter. He's more of a scholar, but in that version of the story, he's basically the equivalent to Van Helsing.
It's Shadow of the Vampire, not Shadow of the Bat.
Shadow of the Yeah. I haven't seen that, but I've heard of it.
Okay, so it's literally based off of the Nosferatu film. So it's actually an adaptation of like Nosferatu or Symphony of Horror. But basically, that movie is it's really funny. Willem Dafoe is playing Nosferatu, and the whole thing's like they're filming the movie of Nosferatu. Like if I recall what it's about, like. Right. I haven't really seen it. Let me see. Created silent classic Nosferatu on location in Eastern Europe. The director is obsessed with making this the most authentic vampire movie ever. To that end, he goes out and finds the Count. So, like, the whole premise of Shadow of the Vampire is that this is the Nosferatu you're watching in Nosferatu.
Huh.
So the whole point of it is, like, you're seeing the behind the scenes of the making of the silent film as it's occurring.
I think that's fun.
That's like
kind of meta.
Yeah, exactly. So the premise of the film is you're watching the silent film Nosferatu being directed and acted in, and that the guy who is the Count is actually a vampire.
Right.
And he's like getting angry when they tell him, "If you will not talk to me this way." You know what I mean?
That kind of sounds like what we do in the shadows. Which was that was kind of like a pseudo documentary. It wasn't like just filming what these vampires do and the different types of them and such.
I haven't seen that.
I still need to watch that too. Melissa keeps recommending it to me. I believe.
But formative ones for me to get back to the original question that you asked is like so that was my first introduction. But the big formative ones were kind of weird, like, Vampire Hunter D, the first animated horror movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when that came out. Like, granted, I was very young. I wasn't allowed to watch it for like 2 more years. I think it came out in like 84 or 85.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it, until like 87.
Yeah. I watched both versions of that after you recommended it to me. I like aspects of the old one better, but I also like some things about I believe it was the 2001 version. The 2000s version is definitely edgier, like more overtly kind of leaning into that dark Gothic. But it doesn't have the same mysticism. Yes, the old one feels more.
Magical.
Apart from being more colorful, it also plays more into the mysticism of vampires and the world that they inhabit. It feels like more of a fantasy story, whereas the 2000s one feels more almost like sci-fi.
Yeah, absolutely agree 100%. We couldn't be more in agreement. Problem is, I like fantasy more than I like sci-fi. Mm-hmm. So for me, that fantasy feel of it always has been. I mean, like if you come over to my house, man, you're going to see a million Dragonlance books. Like I'll read fiction. Mm-hmm. I also read nonfiction, but I truly like Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman have given me more than I could ever give them with $5.99 a book. So that's what I mean. So like fantasy is kind of my realm, as it were, and I like the mysticism involved in that because vampires, by all real definition, shouldn't be science fiction. They should be supernatural, surreal, ethereal.
It is interesting how the genre has done so much overlap between the three over time. Because I was getting ready to say, I wouldn't say vampires are the most versatile monster in all of fiction, but I would say they're one of the most versatile because there's so many different ways they've been portrayed and how their existence is explained, how their powers and the rules around them work. Like literally, not exaggerating, there are 100 different cultures worth, or at least, of takes on vampires, and it's like, I don't know if you could say the same thing about werewolves, zombies. You could about ghosts and demons for sure.
Well, because we're going to go spirits.
But in terms of the big three, or the big four, if we go vampires, werewolves, zombies, and mummies, vampires, I would say, are far and away the most versatile of the four.
Yeah, because of the immortality clause, they can arrive in any era. They can, you know what I mean?
And depending on what version we talk about, that they actually have overlap with the other three as well. You've got versions of vampires that look and function very similarly to zombies, like the Chinese Jiangshi, which we'll get into. Certain versions can turn into wolves. Dracula is big on that. Yeah. You've got versions that are portrayed like mummies.
Well, it depends on where you're at. The Baltic states, or are you in Europe, like the Western Europe?
Yeah, Western Europe alone, you've got differences between the Bulgarians, the Romanians, the more Victorian era, proper English Romanticism period depictions.
I mean, that's all like really valid points, but I think that the other thing you're forgetting to think of is like they're the monster that looks like us.
Yeah.
They can hide amongst us. They're never out of place, and they can dominate us. Like the one thing that I love the White Wolf game, Vampire the Masquerade.
I
absolutely loved it.
I missed out on playing that when it was first out, and I've wanted to play it, but I never had a PC. I was never good at playing games on the computer. Like I grew up with consoles. Oh, the role playing game. I never played that. But I love the video game, but I keep hearing that they're going to remake it. And I wish that they would get on that already, because I want to play it. Like the video game, from what I've watched playthroughs of it and listened to the dialogues and different character dynamics, which they adapt from the original role-playing game. It's a very faithful adaptation of the original game. And the story in the video game is really good. Like the amount of effort that goes into fleshing out these different types of vampires and how their culture works. Are you talking about Vampire the Masquerade? Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, I believe. Okay, so I assume it's built off of the what's known as the World of Darkness, right? Like yes, I believe it's a direct adaptation.
Okay, so then there's going to be a bunch of clans of vampires, which is funny because, the Bruja is obviously witch in Spanish. You know what I mean? They're like a punk anarchistic kind of nihilistic breed is
that video game is basically to this what the Witcher games are to the original novels, except you could argue Vampire the Masquerade is actually more faithful to adapting the game than the Witcher games are to adapting the original books, because the games obviously took a lot of liberties.
I can't honestly say that I know that to be factual or not, and I believe you wholeheartedly, but what I'm saying is if you've got volume upon volume upon volume, I mean, they even printed the Book of Nod. They did all of these things in Vampire the Masquerade that were the lore, like Methuselah, and the whole lineages of stuff. Like Menelaus is one of the Methuselahs in Chicago by Night, right? And so anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is that's an entire fleshed out world in the books for the
it's almost like if you consider Anne Rice's books to be the equivalent to Tolkien level lore for vampires,
I would consider Bram Stoker's Dracula to be that.
If Bram Stoker is Tolkien and Anne Rice is, let's just say Christopher Tolkien, then Vampire the Masquerade would be, in some ways, I would say almost like a spiritual successor to those two, just in terms of the sheer amount of depth that went into the lore. And you could tell that the Masquerade's lore clearly takes several cues from pre-existing folklore with the amount of detail that goes into
they did an entire history there. That's the whole point. In their idea is also the idea of certain factions. Some people believe that the first vampire was in fact Cain.
Yeah, the blood of Cain makes our fate.
Well, he who slew his brother Abel in biblical sense. He was cast out into the land of Nod, forced to wander for always.
That's the major tagline of the video game is the blood of Cain makes our fate. And Cain is actually a character who appears in the game.
That's interesting because Cain is never seen in the actual...
Rephrase. It's heavily implied that it's Cain, but I don't. If I remember right from watching playthroughs of the game, I don't believe he ever officially identifies himself.
Okay, so that makes more sense because Cain, we don't know if he exists, if he's in torpor, if he was, took his own life or something, But anyway, so Anne Rice's books were actually, I I consider the first 3 books of the Vampire Chronicles to be like really well done, well written stories. Now, unpopular take, or popular take, I don't know, but I consider the rest, like the furthered books, to be mostly like LGBT porn.
They kind of strayed away from the themes of the original series.
I mean, and they became so like far-fetched. Like, I can get into fantasy, but like, you know, you're mixing like religious beliefs and stuff, like, you know, and like Memnoch the Devil, you know. All right, so the first 3 books are obviously Interview with the Vampire Lestat, and Queen of the Dead.
That's another one I grew up with, was the interview with the Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise
it's a good
interview
movie,
with the
but
vampire
their
movie.
casting was crap.
That's the common thing I've heard, is that it's a very well done movie, but not a good adaptation of the characters.
Yeah, but that's not something I can't live with. Like Brad Pitt was actually pretty decent as a Louis, you know, adaptation. Lestat, no.
Mm-hmm.
Lestat's the little wolf slayer. I mean, like, Tom Cruise loves to play guys he shouldn't be playing. Like, you know, for everyone listening, yes, I'm talking about Jack Reacher. All right, but he loves to play people he should not be playing. There's nothing about him in, like, what was he, like 40 at the time? You know, 30s, 40, whatever. It doesn't matter. He's way too old to be Lestat. And I'll be honest, I mean, like, you had Antonio Banderas playing one of the best characters, like, most well-written characters in the entire Chronicles of the Vampire Armand. And Antonio Banderas is like, Armand is 17. He is a 17-year-old who is immortal. And you got Antonio Banderas playing a 17-year-old, bro. He was like 45.
That best guess is they didn't want someone who was canonically a 17-year-old having sexual tension with Brad Pitt. That's the best guess.
Well, he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have. He'd have had it with Tom Cruise. So.
Yeah. Either way, you probably
Lestat is the main character.
You probably would have gotten into problematic territory if you did that.
I get that, but have you read the Vampire Chronicles, like Anne Rice's mysteries?
I might have heard some of it on audiobook before. I have not read any of the stories all the way through. Because Anne Rice is just, her writing style is just, it's like trying to read Tolkien or Shakespeare. It's beautiful writing, but the language, the language is just kind of hard for me to follow at points.
So see, and me being like an 19th century English literature lover, like, I don't find her that way at all, but at the same time, I almost find her to be like, very normalized, like everything being kind of jargon, almost like the Rex Stout, Nero Wolfe stuff, where it's very contemporary for the era that it's written in.
I'll have to give it another try sometime. If I'm sure there's like an audiobook of it online that I could find. Like, there's so many audiobooks you can find for free nowadays on like YouTube.
So Louis is basically like, in a weird way, her first book comes off, Interview with the Vampire, comes off almost like a Sherlock Holmes novel. You know how you look at everything, you view everything through the eyes of, Dr. Watson. Like, he's the chronicler, he's the storyteller, right? That's kind of Louis. And Lestat is the actual, like, main character. The entire thing's about Lestat. That's why it's Interview with the Vampire Lestat, and the Queen of the Damned. Now, that kind of ends it, but then they just keep going because they were so successful. So she writes, I think Memnoch, I could have these completely out of order.
Yeah.
It's either Memnoch the Devil and then the Vampire Armand, or the Vampire Armand and Memnoch the Devil. I think maybe it's Armand then Memnoch. Either way, eventually he's drinking the blood of Christ, like going back in time by the devil sending in it gets really too out there. And then you've got all the like new chronicles, which is like, Marius's book, who, by the way, excellent character until he gets his own book, at which point it evolves into, porn.
Have you seen any of the new Interview with the Vampire series? He's the one that I think AMC is currently doing.
I have not.
Everything I've seen of that series so far, and I'm speaking as someone who was introduced to this through the movie, even compared to the movie, which already took liberties with the source material, the new series is garbage. Like, speaking as a casual, like, my opinion, it is hot, steaming, Jurassic Park level piles of shit. It's barely even the same story.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like, it's a really weird thing. Like, you can be safe from a vampire as long as you don't become dominated by it.
Yeah,
entranced, you know.
That's what I was going to get. That's what I was going to get into. Is there's so many different folklores and abilities and weaknesses is in different cultures. Just to list off a few examples here, you got Bram Stoker, of course. I'm going to butcher some of these pronunciations.
Hold on. Okay, so if you're talking about this, that's not even like really spelled right. You want to look at the Strigoi.
The Strigoi, that's Romanian, and I got that listed there. And this other spelling I found says Striesgon.
That's the Jiangxi, the Ustral,
the Upyor, or
Upyor,
the Verdalak. That getting into a mix of the Slavic and the Jiangxi. That's Chinese, but there are also versions of it in Indonesian, Japanese.
I believe that's called the Abartak.
Abartak, that's Irish. And they got versions of the Jiangxi in Korean and Vietnamese culture as well. You've even got, this isn't technically a vampire, it's a different folklore or a different mythic being with vampire-like traits. But you got the blood-drinking, lion-headed goddess Sekhmet in Egyptian religion.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's just way too many to list for one episode. You'd have to do like a series of podcasts to cover all of them.
Yeah. But I think that's the great thing about it is like, you know, this is your monster of choice. This is the like you have historical reference. You have fantasy depictions, sci-fi depictions all over film and cartoons, theater.
You could find one version of vampire alone that probably has more powers at this point than Superman. And it's no contest the amount of abilities that some vampires are given at this point. It's like Batman's utility belt stacked on top of Martian Manhunter's power stacked on top of Superman's. It's arguably the most imaginative of the major monsters because there's almost no limit to what you can do with it in terms of how to portray its appearance, abilities, weaknesses.
Well, yeah, and I'm more of a fan of the classic vampire, okay?
Yeah.
It has just as many weaknesses as it had powers. You know, sure, it had the super strength, ability to fly, but only via turning into mist, or bats, wolves, any creature of the night.
Turning into mist, or like some versions, it's a mist of blood that can like suck the blood out of you.
But I'm talking about the classical European, you know, 1800s,
just turning into a cloud
turning
of mist,
into mist like a fog or something. Yeah, turning into mist, turning into any creature of the night. So owls, you know, wolves, bats. It's you know, strong, tough.
And they all have a common theme, whatever it turns into. They at least the animal-based forms, they all tend to have a common theme of being nocturnal-based predators.
Creatures of the night.
Creatures of the night. It partially depends. I'm curious of what you'd think about this. What would you consider to be the classic vampire lore? Not in terms of popularity, but in terms of history. Because we know there are multiple folklores surrounding vampire-like creatures that they like far predate Bram Stoker.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying. Like the classic lore isn't even, you know, Vladimir Tepish. So like, you know, the real life.
Vlad the Impaler.
Tepish,
or the Vlad Tepish III, I think he was in his lineage. His father was Vlad Dracul the second.
Yeah.
And so I think Bram Stoker actually took his predecessor's name, Vlad Dracul, and then combined it with Vlad Tepish. And
he did.
So the Bram Stoker's Dracula is kind of an amalgamation of that father and son.
But he also took like the more like, it wasn't just the Romanian idea of the vampire. Like he took the European idea of the vampire and he translated it into a distillation of all the folklores he had heard.
Right.
And I mean, he threw away the really silly ones. But I would say like the classic vampire is what he was basing his stuff off of. It's the ones from folklore, the ones that can't cross running water. Holy water is anathema to them. They are harmed by the cross or any invocation in the power of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you see this beautiful thing is the most unclean, and you know, need blood to survive.
I've read some version.
Destroyed by fire, sunlight, and decapitation.
I've read some. I researched like different articles discussing like the roots of these different folklores, where they started, and from the earliest roots that I found connected to what you're talking about seem to be the Slavic vampires.
Yeah, that's where like the origin really based itself.
Right.
Much like with the Dullahan, it was like, that's really more of an Irish folklore, which Ireland's just great at their horror.
Abartok is the only major example I've been able to find of an Irish vampire. He was like a chieftain or a king or something. And the Jiangshi or Jiangshi are interesting to me because they're one of the few examples of vampires that actually don't feed on blood. They feed on life energy,
yes.
like qi,
sure.
or yin energy. Again, there's versions of this in China, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Vietnam. So it depends on what specific version we're talking about. But the traditional Chinese hopping vampire, Jiangshi translates to stiff corpse in simplified Chinese, I believe. And they're synonymous with China's equivalent to zombies as well, because they share multiple traits with, the kind of undead that you'd get in voodoo, and then later in George Romero's era. They don't eat flesh, I don't think. Some versions of vampires eat flesh as well as blood. So they're much more synonymous with zombies. And of course, there's with Jiangshi, you have talismans that are used to deal with them, as opposed to
This is about a primal fear, something that is stronger and better than you in so many ways.
Yeah.
But the imagination gave us ways to combat it. And that's where we were getting with this whole thing on
fear of the unknown, who is at the root of arguably all horror, going back to our earliest ancestors who were struggling to keep their kids alive, huddled around the campfire, or looking at the refracting predator's eye lenses in the dark,
exactly.
watching from the jungles and bushes and trees and whatever. Or like it's around us, it's above us, and then you get into predators that were in the ground beneath them. Then you get into the microscopic ones that for generations the church characterized as demons, and anyone who challenged that narrative could be considered a blasphemer. Or it's like we're such consistently, stubbornly slow learners when it comes to not letting fear of the unknown control us, as well alongside that as coming to accept that what we know may not be correct.
I have it. So what you want to know what a vampire, a great like kind of metaphor for vampires is? It's look at humanity has always had this weird duality itself, right? So like let's take this back like literally. We'll go back 500 years, right? Let's go back to suits, arms, and armor, right? Like we had these swords and stuff, right? All about causing as much destruction as possible. Humanity's always wanted to destroy as much as possible. But we also wanted beauty in that destruction. So, like, you look at like the ornate armors that we made that were at the same exact time that we're in, like trebuchet land, catapults, and siege weapons and swords and halberds. We have an infinite capacity to destroy, but we also want beauty in that destruction. Mm-hmm. And so I think about like vampires, right? There's this incredibly the classic seductive, beautiful, ageless, timeless vampire.
Yeah.
Strong, destructive, beautiful, and at the same time they turn hideous. What's interesting is if you look at the classical vampire, the stake to the heart did not destroy it.
That's true.
So these are all contemporary liberties that have been taken with the monster.
Yeah.
But the classic monster is the one we've described where a stake through the heart doesn't kill it. Decapitation does.
They did that with the current version of Nosferatu, too. Like Bill Skarsgård's version, he wasn't... Like a Willem Dafoe's character flat out says, I don't think stakes are going to do it against this guy. And it's like, in several ways, depending on what version we're talking about, modern vampires are often actually very heavily nerfed compared to the old school ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like the old school ones are just too ridiculously overpowered to write a narrative around about how would you even fight that thing. Unless you're a smart writer, it's more challenging to do.
You see in the World of Darkness with the Underworld movies. You think about that. Underworld, what do you need to do? Well, apparently they're using UV bullets in it. And that was kind of the liberty they took outside of them.
But Blade did that as well.
Enough damage would get it.
Yeah.
But decapitation is the surefire way.
Yeah.
It's like, like everything else in the world, kill it with fire.
It's like Wesley Snipes said it best, that you aim for the head or the heart, anything else is your ass.
Yeah.
I loved Wesley Snipes' version of Blade so much.
He did a good job.
He's very different from the traditional comics version of the character, but I actually think his depiction, it became the definitive version in the same way that Kevin Conroy's Batman became the definitive Batman for generations.
I think it's important to note that you say they're like Superman level power. So Superman has magic and kryptonite. What do vampires get? What kind of weaknesses? We need to cover that before.
The most consistent one that I've seen is sunlight. They did like everything else. I think it is as different generations have gone on. It's almost every other major weakness I can think of has either been toyed with, subverted, or just straight up omitted.
Well, not. Decapitation always works. Always.
I've seen some versions of vampires that can survive not having their heads.
Yeah, well, that's a lame ass version. All right, and fire. Fire.
Fire usually works. I have seen some versions where they can just straight up negate it, like they just magically put it out or something, or they're just inexplicably fireproof, like with Batman's cape. For some reason, the flames just don't spread over them beyond a certain point, and then they just whip their cape, and like the wind force puts it out or something.
Well, the way I'm trying to, excuse me for this yawn, the way I'm trying to get like everybody on the show is like there are tons of powers. They are a veritable smorgasbord of powers. But they're also a veritable smorgasbord of weaknesses. And usually their powers and their weaknesses are almost even when they go across. Like, I mean, maybe in recent years we tend to like do this power creep thing. But I mean, think about this, like the whole World of Darkness that we talked about, right? Like werewolves and lycans, right?
Right.
So like the werewolf, the lycan, the whatever, the vampires in that are much weaker than the werewolves. Werewolves are naturally they're better.
Yeah.
But historically speaking, werewolves have been the slaves of vampires for the first, 500 years of vampiric lore.
Yep.
Werewolves were never the weakness. They were just another creature of the night subservient to the dominating force of.
And then in some stories, like the underworld rise of the lycan.
That's the one I'm talking about. When I say World of Darkness, I'm talking about White Wolf.
They went back to the slave allegory with werewolves being subservient to vampires. Then you have a slave rebellion with
yes, but they're still stronger, faster than the vampire. When that has traditionally never been the case, the werewolf is just a servant of the vampire master. Right? No one can see my air quotations here. They even talk about it in, say, Vampire Hunter D. They talk about it in a multitude of books from the 19th century.
Well, it's very
so. If we're going to go with the classic stuff, werewolves aren't a weakness.
It's very similar to how cats have often been depicted as the natural servants of witches or animal familiars in general.
Yeah.
Well, my friend Caitlin Grant, like, she knows so much more about this than I do. Like her podcast, Plug It Up, which, yes, that's named after Carrie. She does a whole episode going into the history and folklore of witches. And some versions of vampires actually tie into witchcraft as well. So there's a bit of an overlap there in terms of
all of things overlap and all supernatural.
It's like sorcerers, necromancy. Like some versions of vampires have also been depicted as witches or warlocks.
Yeah, and I would hate to not throw this in because Melissa and her love for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. However, that show probably does the worst job of vampires, or maybe just makes them the weakest we've ever seen.
It was arguably kind of a precursor to the Twilight era of vampires, where they very much became like a teen or young adult audience kind of focus.
But what I mean is like stake through the heart, just straight dust them.
Mm-hmm.
So like they become dust from the thing that should only paralyze them, and the sunlight, it's like the wood stake to the organ that doesn't pump.
Mm-hmm.
does to them. I mean, I don't know. And then the hideous face thing.
Well, their biology changes in certain versions too. Like some versions, they look every bit as human after reanimation compared to when they died, as long as they take care of their bodies. Other versions, they have to use their form to hide the true inner beast. That apparently that's their true form, whereas the human body becomes like a shell or a cocoon.
Well, and some of it is like you look at Anne Rice's stuff, and hers was that this one spirit. Oh, we never got to that. So in her idea, like the Queen of the Damned, it was actually a spirit that there was this weird spirit that could like move stuff, like unlike all the other ghosts of the world. He could like actually physically like move things, but he still was like, he would rage and he wasn't very strong in any kind of real sense. But he inhabits the woman who eventually we know is the Queen of the Damned. And she somehow is passing his spirit on in every vampire that's created.
I still haven't seen
So
Queen.
they're all weaker than him because the main is him. But well, no, the movie doesn't touch on this at all. But if you read the book, the supernatural explanation.
I haven't read the books, but it's like so many people grew up with the movie with them. I think it was Aaliyah playing her.
It was Aaliyah.
Aaliyah, and the only thing I saw her in before she passed away was Romeo Must Die with Jet Li.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which was one of Jet Li's first like big Hollywood movies that made him like mainstream for a Western audience. By the way,
and that was before Lethal Weapon, wasn't it?
And his first American movie, I think, was the bad guy in Lethal Weapon 4.
Yeah.
But his breakout role, I think, was. It was either The One or Romeo Must Die, because before that he had typically played. He came up in that era where a lot of martial arts actors were playing like villains for American heroes to fight in like the 80s and 90s. He's
a little tie-in for me though. I think that the Highlander might be based off of vampires.
I could see that.
I love that show too. The original show with Adrian Paul, not the movie.
I think they just brought it to Amazon Prime. I want to start watching it.
You mean the Highlander?
The Highlander series.
Have you never seen it?
No, I told you I haven't seen it.
You're in for a treat. So.
I had the first movie, but I've never seen it.
Which is a good
series.
one. And I mean, for God's sakes, Queen wrote music for this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie's good, but it's not great. Although if you listen to Ricky Bobby, won an Academy Award.
I find it
for the greatest movie ever made.
I find it funny how some people grew up with the actor who played the Kurgan, and I always forget his name, but it's like
awesome.
Imagine people who grew up with seeing him as the Kurgan, hearing him as Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob, and like whole generations of kids know him as Mr. Krabs.
He's Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob.
Yes,
I didn't know that. So you know who to me he is? He's the Kurgan always,
and
then he's this like weird Star Trek species on, I think, Deep Space Nine.
That's right.
Like, yeah.
And haven't they had some? Didn't they have some version of vampires in Star Trek at one point? Or am I misremembering? Star Trek has gone into supernatural territory more than once.
Sure, tons of times. But I mean, it's always like an alien species that we don't understand. I mean, like, think about Q. That's supernatural as hell.
Yeah, I'm not talking like aliens.
The Q continuum. But I'm saying, think about the Q continuum. Yeah. That's weird as hell. And then, like, if you think about, like, the Squire of Golgotha or whatever, right? Isn't that what it's called? The episode, The Squire of Golgotha? Let me look. I think that's what it's called. The Squire of Gothos. Where he's like this all-powerful, like, imp thing. Spock sends an away team down to an uncharted planet. There they find a mansion containing all the artifacts pertaining to gracious living, and the host proclaims he is the Squire of Gothos. And it's basically where they think like the Q idea came from. It was the 17th episode of the first season of Star Trek, the original series. But basically the Squire, his name was like Trelane maybe? But anyway, in the episode, the childish but powerful ruler of the planet Gothos captures the crew of the Enterprise for his own amusement. Sounds very Q-like, right? Does that make sense? Like, he's an all-powerful thing. But he's like, the guy is like wearing like 18th century garb, I'm the Squire of Gothos.
Huh. I did want to go over a few examples of how the causes for vampirism have varied apart from the obvious stuff, like, being bitten or drinking vampire blood.
And then, like, some people making it a disease.
It's like, these are just a few examples from what I was able to find from across different cultures, from the Slavic to the Chinese, for example. A dead body being improperly buried, neglected after being buried, struck by lightning. I think that might be that might have predated Frankenstein. I don't know if Mary Shelley took influence from that.
I don't know. Well, so Mary Shelley took influence. Have we talked about that ever? Mary Shelley, yeah, I did. We did. We talked about it, but it wasn't here. It was at the barbershop. So anyway, Mary Shelley took her influence from those little portable electrical generators they used to do. This was the reason that electricity was considered the power of the gods, bent to the will of man, is because, Mary Shelley and her husband Byron, they were all grave robbers because they were the first leisure society, bored as shit all the time. So they would pick up, they had this little portable generator they'd take with them, and they would shock stuff just like everybody else. Well, they started going in and finding corpses and little birds and stuff, and then they'd actually go get people. And you know what happens when you pass electricity through a pretty recently deceased animal.
There was an episode of 1,000 Ways to Die where they talked about a scientist who did that. I don't remember the name, but it was someone who he ran electrical currents through different animal parts, typically freshly dead ones, to record how they would react until he successfully reanimated a freshly dead snake. For I think a couple minutes. He didn't reanimate the central nervous system. It was just a reflex action, but he reanimated it enough that he accidentally left his hand too close to it, and it bit him, and he died from the venom. And a lot of people who don't understand the central nervous system took that to mean, he brought it back to life. It's like, no, there's a difference between running an electrical current to activate the muscles momentarily versus restarting the central nervous system.
This is why I'm talking about science in the 1800s. Okay, we're first really getting electricity. You get what I'm saying? It's becoming something that people can mess with.
Yeah.
And so, even though you don't have it in homes, you don't have those things. They had those little crank generators.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're sticking these two electrodes on the recently dead stuff, and they're like, wow, it's moving. That's why electricity was thought to be the spark of life. It was coined so many things. The power of God bent to the will of man. You understand what I'm saying? And electricity is a new marvel. Think of it as the nuclear age
and look at the nuclear age. And look at Mary Shelley's title of the original story, Frankenstein
or Prometheus,
or the modern Prometheus, because
he's reborn every
because Victor Frankenstein, the doctor, not the monster, Dr. Frankenstein working with electricity is sort of like the modern, for the time, modern science's equivalent to stories of Prometheus sharing the power of fire with humanity. I think Zeus condemns him to be imprisoned in hell where a crow or raven, giant vulture eats his liver every day, and because he's a god, he's
reborn every morning.
It regenerates every day.
Aetos caucasios, the Caucasian eagle. It's an eagle, sorry.
This ties into vampire folklore as well. A common theme related to them rising from the grave is because they were mishandled, such as by grave robbers or by not being buried properly, that the burial ritual wasn't done correctly, struck by lightning, possessed by an evil spirit, cursed by an outside party, a witch, or raised by dark sorcery like necromancy. But it goes so far beyond more overtly sinister stuff like that. Some of the causes different cultures state for vampirism are outright hilarious, being conceived on specific days, because apparently certain days were considered a bad day to have sex. Dying without being baptized, that's a more understandable one. And dying in an accident, birth abnormalities like being born without teeth or a caul, that's the amniotic membrane enclosing a fetus, developing a unibrow, being born with two hearts or just two of any organ that you shouldn't have, being born with extra teeth, etc. committing suicide.
Committing suicide.
That's a common one. Or a
spirit having unfinished business.
So in some versions, it doesn't even you don't even have to be cursed or bitten by a vampire. You could just be a ghost possessing a body because you have business to finish up in the corporeal world. Well, there are hundreds of different ways to become a vampire. It's like people talk about all the different ways to become a zombie or a werewolf with all the different ways we've played with the concepts up to modern times. Vampires, the number of ways to become a vampire outclass that by a laughable margin.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like, those aren't actually like historical ways. But I mean, sometimes folklore takes on a life of its own, just like in all sorts.
Historical in the context of what the folklores at the time.
Yes, exactly.
What the different cultures believed.
Yeah, but now we probably believe it would be a disease.
That's the thing. A lot of cultures confused vampirism with disease or with the signs of vampirism with the natural process
of emaciation
of deteriorating body. With the skin pulls back over time, so the teeth appear as if they've grown into fangs, when in actuality they haven't grown at all. The skin was just peeling back. The hair can look as if it's growing, when in actuality the skin on the skull is pulling back. The skin on the fingers pulls back, and they look like they've grown into claws. It's like this was something that I used to believe growing up. I believed in these sci-fi rumors that hair and fingernails continued to grow, that new blood cells would be produced, and that the brain would.
New blood cells are produced in about 4 hours.
And depending on who you ask, maybe for up to a few minutes, neurons will continue firing in the brain as it shuts down.
Yeah, we don't know how long that always takes. I'm sure it's quicker if you blow the brain to pieces than if you were to just pierce their lungs.
Yeah, but it's like it doesn't just switch on and off like a battery. It's almost like a generator cooling down in a sense.
I would just say it's a failure of the nervous system. I mean, probably the thought process that think about it. Like, your dreams probably take about 4 fucking seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Your dreams don't take that long. It feels like an eternity in there.
And that is it for this episode of Horror Convos. I hope you enjoyed this first part of our vampire discussion. Part 2 will air next time. And a big thanks to Tony for finally joining me. This is a busy man, and so having him on was definitely a treat. Comment below, what was your introduction to vampires? What are your favorite depictions of them? Do you know any trivia or folklore history that we didn't mention? Do you choose to live the vampire lifestyle within bounds of the law? If so, what are your thoughts on the ideal coffin for the smart shoppers in this economy? Don't be shy with those opinions. Remember, this is more than a podcast. It is a dialogue between horror lovers. Here is your regular reminder that Horror Convos is available to listen to on Spreaker, YouTube, and Spotify. If you'd like to be a guest, remember to email keithhorrorconvos@yahoo.com. New episodes release every other Wednesday, so please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss when our newest content is uploaded. Until we talk again, good night and be well.
Let me ask you a question. When you were stabbing that vampire in there, did you get a little wood?